What if I told you NBA YoungBoy's rise might be following the same path that once almost consumed Lil Wayne? Under the shadow of a father figure so powerful that the entire industry goes silent at his name, Charleston White just dropped a truth bomb that froze the internet. This isn't just mentorship, it's control. And if Charleston is wrong, why is Birdman so quiet? Charleston White wasn't trying to start drama at first. He spoke calmly about NBA YoungBoy, saying he had stopped talking bad about him because he finally understood him. Charleston described YoungBoy as a quiet street kid with real talent, someone who reminded him of a young dog. That gentle tone alone made people pay attention. Because when Charleston stops joking and gets serious, the whole internet listens, and then the conversation took a turn. Charleston wasn't just praising YoungBoy's music anymore. At first, it seemed like harmless commentary, noting YoungBoy's talent, his calm demeanor, his street-smart energy. He called him a little gangster, laid back and talented, words that might pass as simple compliments if you weren't paying close attention. But then he said something that cut deeper than most people realized. YoungBoy reminded him of a young dog. For those who understand hip-hop history, that phrase wasn't casual. It wasn't random wordplay meant to entertain. It was loaded, a reference to an earlier era, to a time when another young artist, Lil Wayne, once called Birdman Pops. That single phrase carried with it decades of unspoken tension, influence, and mentorship that blurred into control. Charleston wasn't just observing YoungBoy's talent. He was connecting the dots, drawing a line between the old Cash Money era and the new generation, between the way Wayne was shaped and how YoungBoy was navigating his own rise. And that's what made it so powerful. For years, the industry had whispered about Birdman behind closed doors. People had always noticed the way he positioned himself as a father figure to young artists, the way he offered guidance and resources, the way he built careers. But no one dared say the part that made people uneasy. The control, the obligation, the quiet pressure that often came with that mentorship. Charleston said it outright. He exposed what many were afraid to even hint at, that Birdman's version of family could be as much about influence and authority as it was about care and guidance. The analogy to Lil Wayne wasn't accidental. Wayne's story is a blueprint in the industry. He came up under Birdman's wing, achieved incredible success, and yet even decades later, the lines between loyalty, gratitude, and control remain a subject of debate. By calling YoungBoy a young dog, Charleston suggested that the same cycle might be repeating, the same energy, the same mentorship, the same invisible leash. And for the people who had watched history unfold, the remark landed like a warning, because if you look closely, there are patterns in the way Birdman works with his artists. He spots talent early, invests heavily, and creates an environment where success feels inseparable from loyalty. The artists flourish, but their growth is guided, managed, and carefully observed. That management can feel like protection from the outside world, but it can also feel like control. And it's not just about contracts or money, it's emotional influence. Once someone positions themselves as your mentor, your protector, your father figure, questioning them becomes almost impossible. Charleston pointed to this pattern subtly, but the message was clear. YoungBoy's energy, his demeanor, his very career trajectory could be shaped by forces that aren't immediately visible to the public eye. Charleston's insight hit even harder because of his credibility. He isn't just a commentator or a fan. He's someone who understands the streets, someone who's lived the dynamics of loyalty, power, and manipulation firsthand. When he draws a comparison to Wayne, it isn't idle speculation. It's informed observation. He's showing that Birdman's influence isn't just financial or professional, it's personal, psychological, and intergenerational. And that influence doesn't always look like what the public expects. It also reframed how people were seeing YoungBoy. To the casual observer, the rapper might seem calmer, more collected, a natural evolution of an artist growing up in the industry. But Charleston's commentary suggested another perspective, that this calm could be a reflection of guidance, or it could be a sign of suppression. In hip-hop, peace and quiet rarely happen without reason. Chaos often gets managed, and the energy of young artists is carefully directed. When you understand that dynamic, YoungBoy's public persona isn't just a reflection of his personal growth. It could be part of a larger narrative controlled by someone else. The remark also resonated because of the stakes involved. Birdman's legacy, Wayne's success, and YoungBoy's future are intertwined with billions of dollars, massive cultural influence, and the reputations of everyone involved. When Charleston draws the comparison, he's not just talking about a young artist. He's talking about a system that rewards obedience and shapes careers while maintaining the appearance of mentorship. That's why the young dog line hit so hard. It was shorthand for the repeating cycle of influence, talent, guidance, loyalty, control, and for the way that cycle can shape lives, often invisibly, and the impact on the audience was immediate. Longtime fans, industry insiders, and casual observers all began to reconsider the relationships between artists and the people behind the scenes. It forced people to confront the question nobody likes to ask: how much of what we see is natural growth, and how much is the product of someone else's strategy, influence, and authority? Charleston opened a conversation that the industry has quietly avoided for decades, challenging the narrative that mentorship is always benevolent and family is always harmless. By connecting YoungBoy to Wayne through that phrase, Charleston also reminded people that history can repeat itself. Birdman's methods may evolve, but the underlying pattern, identifying vulnerable talent, fostering dependency, and guiding careers with both opportunity and expectation, remains. The young dog comment wasn't just about YoungBoy. It was about legacy, power, and the subtle ways influence can operate behind the glitz and glamour of hip-hop. Ultimately, Charleston's words were a wake-up call. They encouraged listeners to look past the headlines, the music, and the public image to see the dynamics operating behind the scenes. Talent may be natural, but control, influence, and mentorship come with layers that aren't always visible. And Charleston was pointing at the pattern: past, present, and possibly future, showing how the same story that shaped Wayne might now be shaping YoungBoy. In saying YoungBoy reminded him of a young dog, Charleston didn't just praise him, he decoded a system, revealing the invisible threads of mentorship, loyalty, and power that have long defined Birdman's role in hip-hop. And for those paying attention, it was a subtle but powerful warning. History isn't just repeating itself, it's being guided, shaped, and controlled behind the scenes. It opened a door to a topic the industry always tries to ignore: loyalty, power, and how the idea of a father figure in hip-hop can get complicated. Then Charleston went even further. He warned that something wasn't adding up with the sudden peace between YoungBoy, Dirk, King Von's camp, and others. He pointed out how fans were fighting and bleeding for years, and now suddenly everything is friendly? He said if it were truly all love now, federal agencies wouldn't still be watching so closely. That was the moment everything changed. Charleston wasn't being funny. He wasn't rambling. He was exposing patterns and naming names: Birdman, YoungBoy, a cycle he's seen before. The silence online was loud because this wasn't just gossip. It felt like Charleston knew exactly what he was saying. He suggested that Birdman's relationships with young artists go beyond business deals, deeper, tighter, and maybe too controlling. And once he said it, everyone started rethinking the father-son image Birdman has always pushed. Yes, he has helped build icons. Yes, he's the boss. But what does that power cost the ones he takes under his wing? People have noticed this pattern for years. New stars, new loyalty, same behavior. But hearing it from Charleston, a man who's survived street manipulation himself, hit harder. And now the biggest question is hanging in the air. If Charleston is lying, why is Birdman so quiet? The tension is real, and nobody can unsee the signs anymore. Then Charleston brought up the moment everyone knew was coming: the infamous Birdman and Lil Wayne kiss. That single image has lingered in hip-hop's collective memory for almost 2 decades, a photo that sparked whispers, jokes, and endless speculation. For years, it has existed in the shadows, a symbol of something complicated, unspoken, and deeply personal. And the moment Charleston mentioned it, the internet literally froze. People stopped scrolling. Comments paused. Reactions slowed. That picture wasn't just a photograph. It was a trigger, a visual reminder of the complicated dynamics that have always surrounded Birdman and the young artists he took under his wing. Charleston didn't hesitate. He wasn't speaking in riddles or subtle hints anymore. He wasn't complimenting YoungBoy or dropping casual commentary. He was taking a spotlight, dragging a conversation that the music industry has quietly buried for years right back into public view. For decades, the narrative around Birdman had been carefully controlled. He's the boss, the mentor, the father figure, the man who built legends. Fans celebrated telling. For the first time in a long time, Fans and insiders alike were forced to confront something that had always been whispered about, but never directly addressed. By the time Charleston finished, it was clear this wasn't casual commentary. He had reignited a conversation the music world had tried to suppress for years, about mentorship, influence, loyalty, and the invisible rules that govern success and obedience in hip-hop. The kiss wasn't just a moment frozen in time. It was a mirror reflecting a cycle that many artists find themselves in, a cycle that begins with guidance, but can easily shift into control. And Charleston wasn't afraid to call attention to it, bringing light to a story the industry had long preferred to keep in the dark. Because if Charleston is right, the story of father and son in hip-hop might not be about love, but control. That moment between Birdman and Lil Wayne never truly disappeared. It just stayed tucked away in hip-hop's shadows, waiting for someone bold enough to shine a light on it again. Charleston didn't bring it up to embarrass Wayne. He brought it up to make a point. He was connecting the past to the present, linking the Cash Money era to the new wave with NBA YoungBoy. His message was clear: the playbook hasn't changed. Only the players have, and what shocked people most. They agreed. The same industry that once laughed at Charleston suddenly got quiet. Because deep down, no one ever forgot that moment. The one that blurred the line between guidance and something harder to explain. Then Charleston turned the spotlight back to YoungBoy. He mocked the sudden peace between rappers who were once deadly enemies. At first, it sounded like a typical Charleston rant. But underneath the noise, there was a warning. He was saying, this peace happened too fast. Too clean. Someone powerful is managing it. In Charleston's world, peace isn't random, it's controlled. And if Birdman is the one making that peace happen, then he's not just a mentor. He's rewriting the story. He's shaping YoungBoy's life the same way he shaped Wayne's. Charleston reminded everyone that YoungBoy is big business, possibly a billion-dollar artist. So why wouldn't someone want to steer his every move? He wasn't wrong, he just said it in a way only he can. Because the truth is, the streets don't solve years of bloodshed overnight. If yesterday was bullets and today is kumbaya, then someone is pulling strings behind the curtain. That's when people realized this. Wasn't just chaos, it was pattern. Recognition Charleston wasn't attacking the peace. He was questioning the price of it. If the feds are still watching, if the tension is still real, why does the picture look so calm? His words hit like a blade aimed at the machine surrounding YoungBoy. And behind that machine, one name kept popping up: Birdman. So now the question becomes, if this is all a performance, who is directing the show? That's where Charleston crossed the line, a line most people in hip-hop are too scared to touch. You can joke about cities, rappers, fans, but the moment you challenge Birdman, the air gets heavier. Because Birdman isn't just a name, he's influence, history, and power. Charleston said Birdman still moves like a street boss, not a guiding mentor. He pointed out that Birdman stays connected to the young, stays close to rising stars, and stays in control. That wasn't a compliment. That was a warning. He was saying, Birdman didn't change. He just found new sons. Charleston wasn't throwing casual shade. He was making a direct accusation, one that doesn't disappear with time. The conversation had officially moved away from music. Now it was about power, control, and intention. So when Charleston claimed Birdman isn't the loving mentor everyone sees on camera, it didn't sound like gossip. It sounded like he was taking aim at one of hip-hop's most untouchable truths. Birdman always brags about how much he's given to Wayne, Drake, and Nicki, hundreds of millions, straight from his own pocket. But Charleston's point wasn't about the money. It was about the system behind it. He was exposing a rule nobody dares to break. You don't question the gatekeepers. But Charleston? He doesn't just question them. He tears apart the whole structure. He said Birdman doesn't guide artists. He grooms them. Not mentorship, obedience. The kind of control you'd expect in cults, not record labels. Because when Birdman steps into a room, people don't cheer. They go silent. And silence tells the truth. Charleston accused Birdman of shaping image, not growth. And in this industry, image is the leash. It decides who gets fed, who gets heard, and who disappears without a trace. And once Charleston said it out loud, the internet split in two. Half said he finally spoke the truth. Half said he was poking a powerful giant. Because if his suspicions are right and Birdman's influence reaches deeper than music, then every artist tied to him doesn't just owe success, they owe submission. Suddenly, Fans realized this wasn't just about Birdman or NBA YoungBoy anymore. It was about the silent power rules in hip-hop. Strange how the loudest voices online go quiet when certain names come up. Podcasters stop talking. Bloggers stop analyzing. Rappers look the other way, not because they don't know, but because they're afraid of what happens when you talk too much about the man who controls the room. Fear doesn't always shout. Sometimes it just keeps its head down. Behind the scenes, you hear whispers about producers asking permission before meetings, artists refusing interviews, and executives still acting like Birdman's shadow covers half the rap world. That's when the truth hits. This is bigger than 2 artists or 1 label. This is power disguised as mentorship. The industry loves the story of a father figure saving a lost artist. But Charleston was suggesting something far darker behind that hero narrative. Charleston White wasn't just speaking. He was exposing a pattern the music world has ignored for decades. At first, it sounded like praise for NBA YoungBoy, talented, quiet, like a young dog. But then he shifted. He wasn't just talking about music anymore. He was talking about control, power, intent. Birdman, Charleston suggested, isn't always the caring mentor everyone believes. He's a gatekeeper, a figure whose influence can shape not just careers, but lives. Money is part of the story, hundreds of millions to Wayne, Drake, and Nicki, but money alone doesn't explain the hold he has. Charleston called it out. Birdman doesn't just guide artists. He grooms loyalty, sometimes more like obedience than mentorship. When Birdman walks into a room, it's not applause, it's silence. And in that silence, he shapes image, controls narrative, and decides who thrives and who disappears. People noticed the pattern immediately. YoungBoy's energy changed when Birdman entered his orbit. Outbursts stopped. Chaos vanished. It looked like growth, but for those who know the streets, it looked like suppression. Silence in hip-hop doesn't always mean healing. Sometimes it means someone else is speaking for you. And Charleston made that connection clear, tracing it back to Wayne's story. The protection, the promises, the quiet, almost poetic if it weren't so twisted. Why does Birdman always find artists craving family the most? Wayne didn't have a father. YoungBoy lost his early. Birdman filled that void, and that's where the real manipulation lies. Not contracts, not money, emotion. Once you see someone as a savior, it's almost impossible to question their control. Gratitude becomes loyalty, and slowly, piece by piece, you lose yourself, and the consequences are real. Ask anyone who tried to leave Birdman's system. You don't just walk away. Visibility disappears. Music slows. Your story gets rewritten. Wayne went from son to lawsuit overnight, and even after settling, his tone changed forever. That same guarded energy is creeping into YoungBoy's world, speaking carefully, moving cautiously, aware of how quickly love can turn into leverage. This isn't just celebrity drama. It's a mirror of control, repeated across generations. Mentorship isn't mentorship if it costs freedom. Family isn't family if silence is the price of loyalty. Charleston wasn't being messy. He was pulling back the curtain on a truth the industry has ignored. The scariest kind of control is the one that feels like love. And if Birdman's pattern continues, someone else will always step in, looking for belonging, thinking they're being saved, but stepping into the same cycle. Maybe that's the genius of Birdman's legacy. Not the money, not the deals, but the ability to make power feel like protection. Charleston called it creepy, and maybe that word isn't enough. Truth doesn't cage you. Loyalty doesn't silence you. Real mentorship doesn't require you to call someone dad. What we've